explain yourself, give an account of yourself, of your life. I think most people would find it rather difficult. We would be intimidated into silence about what the hell we were put on this earth for, what the hell we're supposed to do, and if anybody at all is happy about what we've done so far. We might have people telling us that we're okay. Usually it would be loved ones, spouses, parents, children, telling us that our lives haven't been wasted or their lives haven't been wasted bringing us up. We're not a terrible disappointment. It's difficult enough as individuals explaining ourselves to ourselves. What if God tapped us on the shoulder and demanded that we gave an account of ourselves and to explain what the hell we think we've been doing all our lives? And what happens when it is a country that is being tapped on the shoulder? When we think of the multiplicity of sins that even individuals or even fairly well-meaning individuals have committed, that compared with the sins of a nation, the sins of an empire, well, that must be pretty daunting, particularly for historians. So there have been many irregularities in the transmission of national identity after the Second World War. I was born well after the end of the Second World War, but obviously I would know people who talk about the war a lot. It was, after all, a world war. And people would have different ideas about why it started and who won and how well it was fought. But when you think of a history as long as the Jews, when you ask them, what do they think they've been doing all this time? It does get awkward and probably a cause for national and tribal neurosis. So I am, I suppose, asking people to first work out how they would feel if they were asked to give an account of themselves, particularly if you're older than just a young person and you're middle-aged and you've got, well, a whole bunch of mistakes and sins under your belt. All the more then would old countries, ancient nations such as the British, and even relatively new nations like the Americans, like America. Now, a change of identity is inevitable after war and revolution. I've been talking about revolution recently, and revolutions being politically very significant are I don't know. Well, it's a problem of historians, isn't it? And perhaps even the best historians who try to tell the truth, who find themselves censored or being deprived of a living, but they might not be so keen about telling people the historical truth as they see it. And of course, after a controversial war in which the global empire of the British was lost, there will be many, 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 many skeletons rattling around in the imperial cupboard. If you listen to how Jews talk about themselves, a lot of these ancient disputes are actually still, up and running. The Hanukkah, which is coming up, will be about Jews who don't care that much about their identity, who would rather assimilate and be Greek than be properly Jewish. There will be much talk about traitors who wanted to do one thing rather than the other, and maybe quite a few ongoing disputes that are as yet unresolved. So, to get an idea of ancestral and ancient disputes, Jewish history is a very good starting point. And the thing about Jews is that their story is reasonably well known, being contained in the Old Testament. What about the British, though? You'll find that if you're interested in history, as I am, you will find different ways of teaching history over the decades. I still have those cloth-bound history books that you can get in second-hand bookshops, written in quite complex language that I don't think a schoolchild of any equivalent age would be able to understand. I hear these days that school children are not even required to read a complete Shakespeare play because that apparently is beyond them. So we can see how much a modern 21st century mobile phone owning school child would be quite divorced from the historical and cultural knowledge of his parents, his grandparents. They would know nothing about Rome or Greece, the Greek myths. They would actually know very little that their grandparents and ancestors would take for granted. So they would be quite different creatures with a quite different conception of their national identity. Yesterday I was talking to, I think it was Domingo, about how an Englishman in the second Elizabethan age would be quite different from an Englishman in Tudor times. I'm sure they would look upon each other with horror and disgust. The attitudes utterly changed and incomprehensible to the other. Are there not universal and internal laws about how humans should behave towards each other? I think there are. But in every age, intellectuals think they have discovered something new. So with regard to national identity, it is very frustrating when you're talking to people who don't know they're an empire, who don't recognize what is an imperial war, because, well, the governments don't tell them it's an imperial war. The people never know. So if you've done the Eastern question, if you studied history as I did, you'll know that it's enormously complex and has, well, lots of things that I barely remember, like the Treaty of San Stefano and uh, all these places and countries in Eastern Europe that are a nightmare of complexity. And even the Schleswig-Holstein question was very complicated, even for Palmerston, who famously said that, what was it? There are only three people who understand the Schleswig-Holstein question. You know, number X did, but he's dead, and Y did, but he's gone mad, and Z did, but he's completely forgotten about it. Something like that. But if you're talking to people who don't understand their own history, then it becomes very difficult to make your point. And I've been trying to make my point for a long, long time. I try to make my point with Jews. I try to make my point with Gentiles, and I've not been terribly successful because, well, people don't want to take my point. They don't want to know. Jews don't want to be told that in 2,000 years of Christian history, they have not once tried to teach the Noahide laws properly to Gentiles. And so, today I've been accused of browbeating rabbis by being a little insistent that they give me an answer. I do understand that they don't particularly want to do it, because to do what I ask them to do would draw attention to themselves, and if they start doing what I ask them to do, the inevitable question would be asked about, well, why didn't you do it already? But even that would be a good starting point to launch a Jew and Gentile dialogue about anti-Semitism and all its historical horrors. I would be very happy to facilitate that conversation. But first, somebody has to begin to say that they will talk about these things. And I find it infuriating that all these rabbis who more or less say to me, are you joking? Do you know what they've done to us? Have you no idea about the history of Christian persecution? Of course I do. But this does not take away the fact that Jews were told, were created, were made God's chosen people to do something. And it's not just about them being, better and special and chosen, while the rest of the human race wasn't. I think it was for a logical and necessary purpose to kickstart the whole idea about religions created by revealed scripture. There are only two. So we should be grateful, really, that God, if he exists, has made it easy for us. God divided humanity into Jews and Gentiles, and he made only two revelations for each of them. So there's only the Torah and the Quran to choose from. And you would have thought, it's so easy, isn't it? You've only got two, you're only Jew or Gentile, and, well, then obviously you choose the one that doesn't have 36 capital offences. What's so hard about that? But then I don't have the cultural baggage of 2,000 years of Christian anti-Semitism. So I suppose I'm fortunate in that. I've also explained so many times to the Americans. I've even made all those memes of all these 50, well, not, I didn't make 50 memes of the 50 American states, but I put it to them, I put it to the Americans that if each American state could interpret the Quran in the way that they want, they wouldn't agree on the interpretation of the Quran. They'd have their own, little jazzy way of interpreting it in California or Idaho or New Mexico or, well, Delaware, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. They'll have their own little way of doing it, so they wouldn't exactly lose their identity. So I'm making really quite a simple point. American history is littered with Islam, really. I discovered over the weekend that lots of Christians have been trying to pretend that the founding fathers were Christian when they're obviously not. I know for a fact that 5 of them formally repudiated the Trinity. And I also made a video at the weekend saying that Masonry was about getting the adherents of the Abrahamic faiths in one club or lodge to eventually, when it was safe or necessary to do so, point out to Christians that they're the odd one out, they're it. They have the religion of idolatry and blasphemy, and they should mend their ways. And I think the time must be now. Christine Ramsey, the Catholic woman, said that these days you don't even have to be a theist to become a Mason, because she knew for a fact that 2 of her friends who were atheists could join. But that is the thing, that is the terrible thing when people lose their principles. Because the whole point of being a Mason was that you would have to be a believer in a creator to be able to join. You can't be a Hindu, you can't be a bit Buddhist, you really had to be a member of the Abrahamic faiths. And now they've diluted that principle because they're so desperate for new members, I suppose. And of course, you have Jews who don't know who the hell they are. But it should be helpful to them to know that the Torah does not envisage Jews having any kind of religious freedom, because it says quite clearly in the Torah that Jews who break the Sabbath are to be stoned to death. So even if you don't agree about these things, Scripture is quite clear. There are plenty of clear things in the Quran that Muslims don't follow either, so they shouldn't start congratulating themselves about how much better they are than Jews when they cherry pick their holy book as well, and perhaps with less excuse because their holy book doesn't contain 36 capital offences, so they don't even have the excuse of being humane. So the other identity issue that Westerners need to resolve is what kind of society they are. Are they a matriarchy or a patriarchy? And if they are a matriarchy, hadn't they better do something about it? Unless they really want to cancel themselves. And the only people really capable of fixing it would be masculine men, and masculine men would be men capable of defending a patriarchal principle from a moral system that would promote and protect the patriarchy. And it seems that there aren't any men available in the West capable of doing this. And that's why I'm the one talking about these things. I am the only one talking about these things. But that's not to say that because I'm the only one that I'm wrong. I think it makes me more distinctive. So the only way to fight this is to use truth, logic, and morality and have the courage to follow where truth, logic, and morality leads you. And this is required of both Jews and Gentiles. And all they have to do is they have to do the thing, they have to say the thing, they have to think the thought, to say the thing, to do the thing. And eventually everything will be fixed. But somebody else other than me has to do it. Somebody else has to do the right thing to put in motion a chain of events that will correct the errors of the past. What are the errors of the past? Of course, it is that Christianity has been a practical joke. Would God play a practical joke? Why not, if he exists? Because the inevitable question of, well, why did he allow Christianity to acquire 3 global empires? Why did he allow Christians to prosper? Well, it's a trap, though, isn't it? So you could think of 2,000 years of Christian history as, well, nothing more than you going out and going to a party and drinking too much and then suffering from a hangover. In cosmic terms, it is probably the equivalent of that. So you may have an enjoyable experience at the moment, but there's nothing to say that you won't pay for it dearly later on. There is a logic to Christianity because it's really a demonstration of why a religion would fail, causing a civilization to fail, changing its people, or causing its people to deteriorate to such a degree that, well, I don't think their ancestors would recognize them or approve of them. So why would God allow 3 global empires to be Christian? It is, I think, to demonstrate that all empires fall, and they all fall for a reason, and they would fall for not following the rules that made them successful. Something to bear in mind is that Confucian principles are more more enduring than Christian principles, because when you think about it, Confucius lived and died about 500 years before Christ was born, and the Chinese still go on about it. They still go on about Confucian principles, probably because he put them in a way that is easy to remember. Confucius did not have a smooth path in history. He was alternately respected and then went out of fashion, um, and then recently he has been revived. The Chinese joke that they are all really legalists pretending to be Confucians. Legalism is an imperial methodology which basically practices the principle that you can control people by changing the laws and by rewarding and punishing them appropriately. Is there any need for legalism in Islam? No, because it's already perfect, because whatever it is, that behavior that we're supposed to encourage or discourage is already in the Quran. So there is no need for a separate branch of legalism. But the Chinese had to start from scratch when they had their empire. Remember, at the time of the first emperor, Christianity hadn't started. But then the Chinese had a head start on the Europeans and Americans by having their war of Chinese unification, of national unification, nice and early. And once that was done, things became easier, and empire became logical. That was why they had the idea of competitive examination for civil servants, and meritocracy, and imperial measurements, and that kind of thing. So that's all been done a long time ago, and I think the Chinese know that they are an empire, while many Western nations are a little conflicted and confused about what to call themselves. Does America? Well, America doesn't officially call itself an empire, but it behaves like one. And do ordinary Americans think of themselves as imperialists? Probably with some embarrassment, I think. And I don't think that Trump and his supporters actually want to be imperialists, because they see no benefit in these imperial wars. Of course, it's a different thing if your imperial wars are successful, but Vietnam and Korea and Afghanistan are not examples of successful, glorious imperial wars. The Romans had a better idea with their triumphs. So generals would go around conquering territory and bring back booty and loot and prisoners to parade before Romans, before these foreign captives would be strangled. But that was the kind of imperialism people liked, of booty and success and humiliated, conquered peoples. We don't want that sort of thing anymore, at least not officially. But the crisis of identity in the West is not just about immigration and religion. It's the fact that they don't know who they are. Are they still Western imperialists? Are they? And is it safe to say that they are Western imperialists when they have so many foreigners in their country that they're not supposed to be racist towards? Every little rule doesn't quite make sense with when you think of their history. And that is what is causing so much angst and anxiety and anger and confusion in the mind of the Western man. Even worse, he doesn't quite know how to behave towards his women. And he may be thinking of becoming a woman himself because he's been told by his government that that's all right. So the Westerner is a person who doesn't think that his government is governing in the national interest, who suspects that his government doesn't know what it's doing, who believes that his politicians are incompetent and corrupt, who doesn't believe in God. I said, I think yesterday, when I was talking about identity again, Jews and Muslims think that they are the slaves of God. This would rattle a few cages of atheists who don't want to think of themselves as slaves and very much disapprove of slavery. But this raises the question of, well, are we the slaves of God? And if we are indeed the slaves of God, is it better to know it or not? I think on the whole, no, not on the whole. I think that if God exists and we are indeed the slaves of God, it is better to know it than to not know it. Obviously. So what is an agnostic to think? Well, these days I have been delving into the system of belief that a theist would have. And I find it actually very helpful. It certainly has assisted me in talking to rabbis and, well, frightening them with God. Because I think it works. It works in the sense that if I say to them, if I just turned up and showed myself to be an anti-Semite and said, you're terrible people, well, they wouldn't care, would they? But if I said to them that, look, you're terrible people because you haven't been doing what you were made God's chosen people to do, and he must be very angry with you. That would have make more of an impression on them than me just saying that I hate them because I never liked the look of them or anything like that. So I really think that this system of belief is very, very useful indeed. And if all these beliefs were internalized, understood, remembered, absorbed, then people would act properly. They would act according to their beliefs. They wouldn't be lying and believing in nonsense. They would actually speak the truth as they see it and argue rationally and act within the parameters of what their religious principles allow them to do. And this would be a much more orderly society where problems would be identified and solved much, much sooner than they are now. Because then not only would people be acting rationally and speaking honestly within defined rules of moral behaviour, they would also have a hierarchy. So you'd have a problem and you could go to the right department. You'd be able to identify who's in charge, and people will be what they say on the tin, if you know what I mean. They will be doing what they're supposed to be doing. Censors will censor, policemen will police, leaders will lead, men will be men, and women will be women. And this will give us an orderly society where things can perhaps be righted again. But I need people to support me in making this modest proposal that we act according to what we believe to be moral, logical, and true. It seems to me that all these rabbis that I've been talking to, who virtually scream at me saying, do you know what you're asking us to do? And I'm saying, yes, I know how mean they were to you. But the point is that you're still supposed to do it anyway, because that's the whole point of following a principle. You don't just tell the truth because you're going to get patted on the head and given a sweetie. You have to tell the truth even though you were the one who chopped down the cherry tree. And your father is angry with you. That is the essence of following a principle. You do it whether you are rewarded or punished, because you believe in the afterlife where doing the right thing will be rewarded by God. And what if you don't believe in these things? Well, I think you're still obliged to behave as if you believed by obeying these laws in order to make the world a better place. And of course it does make the world a better place if people acted according to principle, and the moral system of their nation is clearly articulated and understood by its citizens. And then you would have a sense of social and national cohesion. I think I've explained reasonably well what it all means in theory. As for the practice of it, obviously I can't do it myself. And I think the problem is that we have too many distractions, too many notifications on our computer and our mobile, and we don't read anymore, and we probably don't talk to each other properly anymore because we prefer to talk to strangers and argue with strangers online because it relieves a lot of our feelings. But all things have to go through the proper channels, and that's why I'm going through the Jews. Because really, if there is any kind of hierarchy, if God exists, we can only approach him through his chosen people. And we can petition for God's chosen people to do what they were chosen by God to do. And if they refuse, then and we'll have to make other arrangements. And it should be impressed on God's chosen people that consequences might follow if they don't do what they were supposed to do. And if they say, well, we never believed in this nonsense anyway, we only pretended to believe in God because, well, being God's chosen people in a Gentile nation where Jews are actually conferred a higher status than Gentiles was irresistible. If we could be Jewish without following the practices of Judaism, if we can still be considered Jewish, if we break the Sabbath and promote gay marriage and have sex outside marriage and have illegitimate offspring and do all these things, then why wouldn't you be Jewish? But that's not what Scripture says. So I think to explain ourselves to ourselves, we need to discover what we are supposed to be. And the system of belief created by the Abrahamic God of being created Jew or Gentile, male or female, it's very helpful. So if you accept the premise that God is your creator and you are either Jew or Gentile, then of course it becomes quite obvious which scripture you ought to choose. If you're Gentile, and once you decide that it is the Quran, then things will be much easier. Of course, you can't decide on the Quran without acknowledging that Christianity is kaput, and then you just have to accept your identity as a nation whose Christianity is kaput, whose democracy is dementia, and whose liberalism is for losers. And once you accept all these facts about your predicament, then the solution becomes ever more obvious, doesn't it? I am trying to make it easy for you. And I think I have. And so to sum up, nothing can be fixed until we know who the hell we are, what system of morality we should follow, what we would actually like, and what is the wrong thing, as opposed to what is the right thing, and decide what we want to do for the right thing to be done. Just a little bit of thinking, a little bit of discussion with people in real life that we trust would be the way forward. Obviously, there's no point talking to insane people who have stupid names in the chat, who are obviously burnt out cases of hatred and loserdom. And so I hope I have managed to explain the process of redemption. If you want to avoid being hopeless cases and people who basically cannot be redeemed. I know it's too late for many people, but let us hope that a few people still want to survive and will do the necessary thinking and speaking and doing to correct a mistake that I think can easily be corrected. Thank you for your attention.